Hello everyone, welcome back to ComMed Made Easy, and I hope you all are doing very well. Before we begin, let me remind my dear students that the contents of this channel are only to supplement your knowledge, not to replace the regular online and offline classes in your institution. So please attend your classes and do not miss them. Also, if you like our contents, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos, and share these videos with your friends, with your batchmates, with your juniors. Also, if you are a teacher, then with your students. Please follow our Facebook page, and the link will be given in the description. Hello everyone. Today's topic of discussion is malaria. The word malaria was derived from Italian words male aria, which with time changed into malaria and then malaria. The word malaria literally means bad air. This is because the cases of malaria were reported from those areas where there was stagnation of water. And because of the stagnation of water, there will be very foul smell in the air. So that is why bad air as in malaria. It is a mosquito-borne disease, and the mosquito spreads the protozoa or parasite Plasmodium species, and it infects the parenchymal cell of livers or the hepatocytes and the erythrocytes or RBC. Now in the next few slides, we have mentioned the current scenario in the world and in India. But the thing is, when people will see this video maybe 2 years or 3 years from now, this data may not be relevant that time. So that is why I am not going into details about the statistics here. I will just mention that the data that is given here is taken from the report of 2019, and we can see that over the last 2 decades there have been huge reduction in the number of cases being reported as well as death from malaria. Also, in Southeast Asia, India have contributed the largest reduction. So that is a good sign, but still we have a long way to go. The number of malarial deaths and the number of cases which are reported all over the world have decreased. As you can see, the data being compared between 2000 and 2019. Even in India, there are certain states where the number of cases are still being reported, like northeastern states, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, West Bengal and Karnataka. But again, the number of cases which are reported and also the deaths have decreased by a huge margin. The number of deaths reported in 2019 were 73, and only 2 deaths were reported till November 2020. Now this number may be a little bit low. That is probably because of the reason that we had a full-blown pandemic of COVID-19 in 2020. So maybe not adequate diagnosis were done, and maybe not all the deaths from malaria were reported. That is a probability, we cannot say for sure. There are different epidemiological types of malaria in India. For example, tribal malaria in tribal population and difficult to reach population, where the number of falciparum cases are quite high as compared to the vivax cases. Rural malaria in villages, where people are involved in agricultural work. That means they are exposed to the environment for a long duration during the day. That means they are also exposed to mosquito bites. Also, during agricultural work, we can have a lot of stagnation of water in the fields. So all these things lead to rural malaria. What about urban malaria? Because of the high population density in urban and suburban areas, it means a lot of people are susceptible to mosquito bites. Malaria in project areas where urbanization, industrializations are going on. So that means because of this project works, there are a lot of debris, concretes, etc. Artificial collection of water is possible, which can lead to mosquito breeding. Border malaria occurs at the border between the 2 adjacent countries or 2 adjacent states. Because of the difference in laws and orders on either side of the border malaria control can sometimes be very difficult. Forest malaria occurs in the forest, and floods and malaria. So during the monsoon and after the monsoon area, that especially after a heavy rain season, there can be floods, and floods means there are stagnation of water. So again, mosquito borne or mosquito breeding and leading to a lot of malarial cases. Now coming to certain definitions in context of malaria. What is malaria control? Reducing the malarial disease burden to a level at which it is no longer a public health problem. So that means there will be malarial cases still being reported, but the number is very low. It is so low that it is not considered as a public health problem anymore. So in that case, it is considered to be a situation where the malaria is controlled. What about malaria elimination? If somehow we can ensure that the local mosquito-borne malarial transmission is interrupted, that means we can stop that, and also reduce the reduce to zero incidence of the infection. So that means the number of cases being reported are also zero. So we have interrupted the mosquito-borne transmission, and also the number of malarial cases being reported are zero. So only in that case we can say that the particular geographical area, especially a country, has eliminated malaria. Now if these two things can be continued for 3 consecutive years, that means the local mosquito-borne malarial transmission and also number of cases being reported to zero, and this has to be done at least 3 consecutive years, then WHO declares, or rather they give a certificate to that country mentioning that the country has eliminated malaria. Coming to malaria eradication, it is the permanent reduction to zero of the worldwide incidence of infection. So that means there will not be any case in future in malaria. Once eradication is done, that means mosquito cannot transmit the disease anymore, and also there will not be any case reported anywhere in the world. So this is a all or none phenomena. So a particular country or maybe few countries can eliminate malaria, but for eradication all the countries in the world has to eliminate. This is a very difficult thing to achieve, and the only disease that we have eradicated so far is smallpox, and since then about 40 years have passed and not a single case of smallpox is reported anywhere all over the world. The virus cannot be found anywhere. So if we can ensure similar things with malaria, only then we can say that malaria has been eradicated from the world. Now coming to the epidemiology of malaria, where we shall discuss the agent factors, host factors, environmental factors, and the vector of malaria, that is the mosquito. First, the agent factors. We already mentioned that it is caused by a protozoa. The parasite is Plasmodium species. There are a lot of Plasmodium species available, but in our country, the two most important species are Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. Sometimes oval and malary are also found. Now this is the life cycle of malaria parasite. I am pretty sure that all of you have already come across this life cycle of malarial parasite in your microbiology or parasitology class, but still I am going to discuss this life cycle in short and will try to point out the important features here. So whenever a mosquito bites us, only if the mosquito has the parasite in it, we can be infected. If the mosquito does not have the parasite, if he bites us, we will not be infected. As simple as that. Now, first thing that we have to remember, and often asked as an MCQ during entrance exam, it is the sporozoite of the parasite, Plasmodium parasite, sporozoite form, that is injected in our circulation when an infected mosquito bites us. So this is the first step that occurs. The infected mosquito bites us and injects the sporozoite form of the parasite in our bloodstream. Now majority of the sporozoites will be destroyed by phagocytosis as a part of defense mechanism in our body, but the remaining sporozoites will infect the hepatocytes or liver cells. Alright, now these liver cells, infected liver cells, will then mature and form the hepatic cyzones. After few days, it will rupture. The hepatic cyzones are ruptured, releasing multiple merozoites. So as you can see, this is the ruptured hepatocyte and these dot-like structures are the merozoites. They are being released from the ruptured hepatocyte. So these merozoites now will infect the red blood cell. Now remember, once the red blood cell is infected, the erythrocytic cycle begins. Erythrocyte means RBC. Before that, whatever happened, that means the sporozoites infecting the hepatocytes, which then maturing to cyzones, leading to rupture of the hepatic cyzone and merozoites. All these things are considered as exoerythrocytic cycle because the parasite has not yet entered into the RBCs. So that is why exoerythrocytic. Okay, so once the merozoite has infected the RBC, it will change in form inside the red blood cells. First, it will produce immature trophozoite or ring stage, and then mature trophozoite, then erythrocytic cyzone, and the same thing occurs. Next, the erythrocytic cyzone, they rupture, releasing multiple merozoites, and these merozoites will attack and infect fresh batch of RBCs. So because of that, this cycle continues. Alright, this is known as erythrocytic cycle because this cycle occurs in the RBCs. Now we have to remember one thing, not all ring stage or ring trophozoites mature in the same way. That means this erythrocytic cycle may not occur. Majority of the ring trophozoite will continue in the erythrocytic cycle, but some of them can mature differently and form what is known as gametocyte. Alright, these gametocytes will further mature and form male and female gametocytes. So you can see here we have these male gametocytes and on the left hand side we have the female gametocytes. So our circulation, that means the circulation in our body, the bloodstream must contain the male and female gametocyte in the blood. So this is the cycle of the malarial parasite in human body. First in the hepatocytes or liver cells, then in the RBCs. Alright, and then at the end of the day, our bloodstream may have both male and female gametocytes. Now, another mosquito will come and bite us. Now this is an uninfected mosquito. That means it does not have any parasite in it. It has to take the blood, and the blood must contain both male and female gametocyte in them so that the further stage of the life cycle of the parasite can continue. So if there is only male gametocyte or only female gametocyte, fertilization cannot occur and the further stages will not develop. So that is why this infected mosquito must take both male and female gametocytes during its blood meal. So once it has both and male female gametocytes in its body, so mosquito sucks the blood out of her body and the blood is accumulated in its stomach. In the stomach, the male and female gametocyte will further mature. The male gametocyte will produce flagella known as X flagellation, and because of the chemotaxis, it will get closer to the female gametocyte, which is known as macrogametocyte. The male one is known as microgamete. So fertilization occurs and then ookinete is formed. Ookinete further matures to form oocyst, which is at the outer border of the, or rather outer wall of the stomach of the mosquito. So this is a balloon-like structure that is present in the outer wall of the mosquito's stomach. With further maturation, this oocyst will contain multiple sporozoites in it, and then this oocyst will rupture, releasing multiple sporozoites in the body cavity or abdominal cavity. These sporozoites will then proceed through coelomic cavity to the salivary gland of the mosquito and it will stay there. So now after the cycle, the mosquito shall have fresh batch of sporozoites in its salivary gland. So now this is an infected mosquito. So when this mosquito will bite another person, he will inject the sporozoites in the bloodstream. So this thing again continues. So this is the life cycle of the malarial parasite as a whole. Now in viva examination, sometimes two things are asked in context of malaria, that is relapse in malaria and recrudescence in malaria. These two terminologies are different and we have to understand what they mean. Coming back to this life cycle of malaria, first we shall discuss the recrudescence. So if you remember, these merozoites will infect the RBCs and the erythrocytic cycle goes on. So that means we have different forms of malarial parasite in the RBCs. Ideally, our body immunity system, or maybe if we take anti-malarial drug, they should be able to clear off all the parasites from our bloodstream, that means RBCs. But if due to any reason our immunity is not working properly, or maybe up to its full potential, and maybe the anti-malarial drug we are taking are in wrong dosage or wrong regimen, they may not be able to clear off all the parasites from the RBCs. So some of the parasites may remain in the RBCs, but the level is so low that it will appear that there is no parasite in our bloodstream and we are cured. But since there are a very low amount of parasites remaining, they can further multiply in number and also in form and can cause malaria again after 2 or 3 years. So occurrence of malaria again because of persistence of low level of parasite in the RBCs is known as recrudescence of malaria. Remember, recrudescence occurs only in case of Plasmodium falciparum infection. So falciparum malaria can cause or can have recrudescence in future. Next one that we shall discuss is the relapse. If you remember the previous stage where after being bitten by a mosquito which injects the sporozoites, these sporozoites infects the hepatocytes and then forming the hepatic cyzones. Ideally, all the hepatic cyzones should rupture simultaneously, releasing all the merozoites at the same time. These merozoites will then cause the erythrocytic cycle in future, right? So disease should occur right now. This occurs in case of falciparum, but in case of vivax and also sometimes in case of malaria novel, not all the hepatic cyzones are ruptured at the same time. So what happens? Majority of them rupture causing the disease then, but some of the hepatic cyzones can remain intact and they would rupture in future, maybe after 5 years or 10 years, and then they will release the merozoites and this cycle will go on again and further stages will go on causing the disease in the person once again, maybe after 5 years or 10 years. So that means the disease is occurring here because of the persistence of the hepatic cyzones which would rupture in future, releasing merozoites and causing the further progression of the disease in the body. This persistence of hepatic cyzone and then causing the disease is known as relapse, and this occurs only in case of vivax and also malaria and ovel. So remember, relapse occurs only in vivax and malaria ovel, and recrudescence occurs only in case of falciparum. So this is very important. So who are the reservoir of infections? Reservoir of infection is any person who has both male and female gametocytes in its bloodstream, but also they have to be viable and mature. So the male and female gametocyte, they should be mature and they should be viable, that means alive, and in sufficient density, so that if the density is adequate, whenever a mosquito will bite and take the blood meal, there will be both male and female gametocytes present in its stomach. What is the period of communicability? So as long as the person will have both male and female gametocytes in its bloodstream, he can transmit or communicate the infection to others. Coming to the host factors. Now, all age group are equally susceptible to malaria, but the children, they are more suitable as reservoir. So you can see it is written here, the children are better reservoir than adults. This is because when a mosquito bites a children, the children are not very efficient in killing the mosquito. So it can escape the children and it can again bite another person, which is not in the case of adults. About the gender, both male and female are equally susceptible, but due to the profession or occupation which involves exposure to the environment, males have higher susceptibility to develop malaria. Coming to race again, certain races are maybe less susceptible to develop malaria. For example, Jews. Pregnancy, malaria infection during pregnancy can lead to complications. For example, intrauterine fetal death, intrauterine growth retardation, etc. Socioeconomic development, people belonging to lower socioeconomic status, they live in those environments which are ideal for mosquito breeding. So maybe people living in slum where there are a lot of stagnation of water. Also in this area there are high congestion, that means a lot of overcrowding. So that means people are living in a very small space and the population density is very high. So that also is supportive or in favor of development of malaria. Housing, same thing. The way the houses are prepared or built and the environment around them, whether during the construction work there can be some stagnation of water leading to mosquito breeding, and then it can also lead to malaria. Population mobility is also very important in terms of migration. People can migrate to a new place where they are exposed to a new kind of environment, so they can be exposed to mosquito bites and then malaria can develop. Occupation, as I mentioned earlier, any occupation that involves outdoor activities, especially agricultural works, etc., where the people has to work in the field where there is also stagnation of water, these things can lead to malaria. Human habit, as in how we deal with the mosquito bites. For example, if we wear full sleeve clothes or if we use bed nets while sleeping, then mosquito bite can be reduced. Also, whether we are encouraging insecticidal spray around our houses or inside our houses, whichever is applicable, that also determines whether malaria will occur or not in a given area. Immunity, generally malaria does not provide lifelong immunity, so a person can be infected multiple times and can develop malaria multiple times in his lifetime. Next is the environmental factors. So these are the environmental factors which can come into play and cause malaria. For example, season. So during the monsoon area and after the monsoon area, when there is stagnation of water all over the place, it will act as potential breeding place for mosquito. Temperature, rainfall, humidity, especially after the monsoon, when the temperature is about 20 to 30 degrees Celsius and there was heavy rainfall leading to stagnation of water and the humidity is quite high, all these things favor mosquito breeding. Altitude, mosquitoes are not very common in very high altitude, so that is why malarial cases are not reported very commonly from very high altitude. And man-made malaria, as in we make our own environment, so how we are treating our surrounding, that also depends or rather that also determines the occurrence of malaria. If we throw stuffs around our houses and for example empty buckets, broken buckets or broken utensils which can act as potential breeding places for mosquito, so that will lead to occurrence of malaria. Next one is the vector. We know malaria is transmitted by Anopheles mosquito and it is the female Anopheles mosquito which is the culprit here. There are multiple species of Anopheles mosquito, but in our country the important one is Culicephacis, Fluviatilis, Stephensii, Minimus, etc. Now you have to remember that host can be either intermediate type of host or definitive type of host. Coming to this diagram once again. So the host in which the sexual cycle will occur will be considered as the definitive host, and in which the asexual cycle occurs is considered to be the intermediate host. So if you see in the mosquito, when the mosquito takes the blood meal and it has both male and female gametocytes, they will fertilize, forming the ookinete, oocyst, etc. So this sexual cycle is occurring inside the body of the mosquito. So that is why mosquito is considered to be the definitive host in case of malaria. Whereas in human body, the parasite changes in form and also multiplies in number. But the sexual cycle does not occur because the interaction between male and female gametocyte occurs inside the mosquito, not inside the human body. So that is why human beings are considered to be the intermediate host for malaria. Okay. Now, certain factors which determine the vectorial importance of mosquito. For example, density. So there must be adequate mosquito in high density in a given area so that they can transmit the disease. Lifespan, it is said that the mosquito must survive at least 10 days after taking a blood meal from an infected person. So when a mosquito bites an infected person and takes a blood meal, it will contain both male and female gametocyte. The time needed for the male and female gametocyte to fertilize and going through these stages up to the stage when the mosquito has the sporozoites in its salivary gland is at least 10 days or about 10 days. So that means if the mosquito bites before 10 days, when the parasite is either in ookinete stage or oocyst stage, whatever, that moment the mosquito will not be able to spread the infection because then it does not have the sporozoites in its salivary gland. But once 10 days have elapsed, that means the mosquito already has the sporozoites in its salivary gland, and now if it bites another person, it can transmit the parasite to the newly bitten person. Okay, choice of host, we have to remember that not all mosquitoes prefer human blood. There are certain mosquitoes which also prefer blood from animals like cows, goats, or even pets, cats and dogs, whatever. Resting habits, some mosquitoes prefer to rest inside the house, some mosquito prefers to rest outside the house. So it is the mosquito which lives inside the house known as endophily. This nature actually promotes or rather augments the chance of malaria. Breeding habits, if the mosquito breeds around our houses, so there will be high density of mosquito in the given area and there can be high chance of malaria. Timing of biting, most of the time Anopheles mosquito bites during the night time, starting from sunset to the next sunrise. There are certain mosquitoes like Aedes which causes dengue. These mosquitoes bite during the daytime also, but Anopheles mostly from the evening and then nighttime and late nights. Vectorial capacities actually comprise multiple factors which include many factors like density of the mosquito, choice of blood meal for the mosquito, etc. And resistance to insecticides, in earlier days mosquitoes were sensitive to DDT, but with time they have developed resistance to DDT. So now we have to depend on other chemicals like synthetic pyrethroids, malathion, etc. We shall discuss these things later. Now, what are the modes of transmission in malaria? It can be vector transmission that we just discussed, that means by mosquito. Direct transmission can occur. For example, if a person receives a blood transfusion and the blood actually contains parasite, malarial parasite in it, so it can also cause direct transmission of malaria. Now, over last many years, it has been mandatory to check for malarial parasite and all the blood units that is to be transfused will be checked for malarial parasite. So direct transmission is very uncommon. Sometimes if a mother during her pregnancy is infected, it can also spread the infection to the fetus. So congenital transmission can occur, and this is actually, as I already mentioned, it can be very risky and fetal death can also occur. Incubation period is the time gap between when a mosquito bites and when the first sign and symptom develop. Generally, the first symptom to develop is the fever. So the time gap between mosquito bite and the onset of fever, it is about 10 days. and it can vary according to the species of the parasite. What are the clinical features in malaria? A person or a patient of malaria can come with fever, which can be either intermittent or continuous. He can have chills and rigors. He can complain of headache, muscle pain or myalgia, and also joint pain or arthralgia. He can complain that he has loss of appetite, anorexia, and nausea, vomiting. A typical or classical uncomplicated malaria has multiple stages, rather 3 stages. First one is the cold stage, when the patient feels intense cold and there is vigorous shivering. It can last for 15 to 30 minutes and it is accompanied by headache, nausea and myalgia. This is followed by hot stage, when the patient feels intense heat and the skin is dry and burning. There can be hypotension. It can last as short as 15 minutes or can also last for several hours. And the last stage is diaphoresis stage, where there is profuse sweating followed by declining in temperature. There can be exhaustion of the patient and last for 2 to 4 hours. So the patient will initially complain of feeling cold and he will have shivering, and then he will have very high temperature. There will be dry burning skin. This is followed by profuse sweating when the temperature goes down and the patient feels very, very weak. So this is the classical feature of uncomplicated malaria. Sometimes we can have severe malaria. That means certain signs and symptoms may be present along with fever, shivering, etc. So if any of the signs and symptoms are present, it is considered as severe malaria and should be considered very serious condition. For example, impaired consciousness or coma, which is given by GCS score less than 11 or Blantyre coma scale less than 3 in children. Blantyre coma scale is almost same as GCS score, but this is for children. There can be repeated generalized convulsion, more than 2 episodes within last 24 hours. Cerebral malaria, hypoglycemia, where the plasma glucose is less than 40 mg per dl. Non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, metabolic acidosis. Renal impairment, where the serum creatinine level can be more than 3 mg per dl or urea level more than 100 mg per dl. There can be hematological disorders as in DIC. Circulatory collapse or shock, where the systolic blood pressure is less than 80 mm of mercury, or in case of children it can be less than 50 mm of mercury with evidence of impaired perfusion. Liver dysfunction with bilirubin level more than 3 mg per dl. Hyperpyrexia, that means very high temperature, more than 106 degree Fahrenheit. Hyperparasitemia, where more than 5% of the RBCs have a parasite in them, and hemoglobinuria. So if any of the signs and symptoms are there, we have to consider this as severe malaria. Coming to the diagnosis part. So the classical and the gold standard method of diagnosis is microscopy. So we have to take the blood sample and we have to prepare the thin film and the thick film. Thick film contains a lot of amount of blood. So if there is any parasite, if the density of the parasite or concentration of the parasite in the blood is very low, it can be identified in the thick film. So the presence of parasite can be found in the thick film. Thin film is utilized for identification of the species. So whether that is a Vivax malaria or falciparum malaria can be identified by thin film. So here are some of the examples. You can see multiple tropozoites are here. The ring tropozoites or immature tropozoites can be seen quite nice in these slides. The alternate method, the newer method, and this is more commonly present all over the country, especially at the most basic level of healthcare delivery system like subcenter and all, is the rapid diagnostic test or RDT kit. It can be monovalent, where either Vivax or falciparum can be found, but bivalents are in more use right now. That means we can identify both falciparum and Vivax. So it is a card-like thing. You may have come across this in many places. So this is where we have to pour the blood and the buffer solution, and we have to take the reading here. So in bivalent RDT kit, there are 3 spots, like this left one, C, stands for the control. So ideally this control line should always appear. If the control line is not there, that means this kit is defective and we have to discard the kit and we have to use another kit. So after the control line appears, we have to look for these two lines. Which one appears will actually denote the kind of infection the person has. Here there is a red line, as you can see, in the PF or Plasmodium falciparum indicator. So that is why we can say the person is suffering from Plasmodium falciparum malaria. Sometimes in case of mixed infection, both the lines can appear. So this is rapid diagnostic test kit. Measurement of malaria burden. How we are going to measure how much malarial burden we have in our community? So long back we had some indicators like spleen rate, average inlet spleen, parasite rate, parasite density, etc. But right now we have focused more on these indicators like annual parasite incidence API, annual blood examination rate ABER, annual falciparum incidence, slight positivity rate and slight falciparum rate. Out of this, the first two are more important and we shall discuss these two indicators in details. The first one we shall discuss is annual parasite incidence or API. API is given by the formula confirmed cases during 1 year divided by population under surveillance and the multiplication factor is 1000. So suppose in a district and in a particular block, whatever is the number of total population, out of which how many people have developed malaria, and we shall find out the number out of 1000 and that shall give us annual parasite incidence. So it is a sophisticated measure of malarial incidence in a community. So out of all these people, how many of them are developing malaria? It is an indicator of that thing. So it is based on intensive active and passive surveillance. Cases are confirmed by blood examination. So it can be either microscopy, preferably microscopy, or can also be by rapid diagnostic test. Now, any area where the API is more than 2 per 1000 population per year is classified as high risk area, and we have to deal with that area in a certain way that we shall discuss during control of malaria situation. So remember this cutoff value, this API value of 2 or more is classified as high risk area in India. The next one is annual blood examination rate. To find out the cases of malaria, what we have to do is we have to conduct a lot of diagnostic tests. So unless we do blood examination, we cannot find out the malarial cases. We can miss lot of cases. So that is why it is very important we continue the examination, blood examination adequately in a given population. So annual blood examination rate or ABER is the number of slides examined divided by the population into 100 because it is expressed as percentage. So as you can see, the numerator is the number of slides examined. We are not talking about how many cases were reported. That means how many of the slides were positive. So we just have to do a lot of blood tests. That is the main objective here. So it is an index of operational efficiency. So whether the malarial control or malarial elimination procedures are going on, the efficiency of the program can be found out by ABER. So if the ABER is good enough, that means we are doing a lot of blood tests. So if you are doing a lot of blood tests, the chance of cases being missed is very low. Ideally, the aim is to screen 10% of the population, even though the disease transmission is expected to reduce. So if in any place there is not many cases being reported, even then we should at least conduct blood examination in 10% of the population. So if there are 1000 people living in a village, at least 100 of them should be examined for presence of malaria. So this is annual blood examination rate. Now coming to the most important part of malaria, and lot of long questions are asked from this part, that is the prevention and control of malaria in India. The national program we have against malaria is National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program, NVBDCP. Along with malaria, it addresses other diseases like filaria, Kala Azar, Japanese encephalitis, dengue and chikungunya. And under NVBDCP, we focus on treatment of malarial cases and integrated vector management. Now, before going into details, we must understand the classification of states or urban territories of malaria elimination in India. So, depending on the annual parasite incidence, which we discussed earlier, the states and UTs or urban territories in our country have been classified into different categories. Categories 0, 1, 2 and 3. So, total 4 categories. In those states and UTs where there are not a single case reported is considered as category 0. So that is why in this place the API will be 0. So confirmed case during 1 year will be 0 and this value will also be 0. So API of 0 is category 0. Category 1 is when the state or UTs have API less than 1. And in individual states and UTs, all the districts also have API less than 1. So for example, say West Bengal. If in West Bengal the API is less than 1 and also all the districts individually have less than 1 API, then it will be considered as category 1 state. In category 2, here the states and UT, they also have API less than 1, just like category 1. But what is the difference? In category 1, all the districts in those states will also have API less than 1, but here some of the districts can have API of 1 or even more than 1. Alright, so this is category 2 states and UTs, and category 3 is when the API level is more than 1. So we need intensified control phase in these districts or rather states and urban territories. Now same thing written here. I'm going to skip this slide. So the national framework for malaria elimination in India. What are the goals? The goal is to eliminate malaria, that means zero indigenous cases throughout the country by 2030. So by 2030, you are trying to achieve a state where there will not be a single case of malaria reported in our country, and also maintain malaria-free status in areas where malaria transmission have been interrupted and prevent reintroduction of malaria. So even before 2030, there can be many states and districts in our country where there is no malarial transmission, and we want those states to maintain that status until 2030. So these are the goals for malarial elimination in India. Objectives, as you can see, by year we have set different objectives, but more or less it says the same thing. We want to stop the transmission of malaria by mosquito, and also we want to reduce the number of cases being reported as long as possible, so that ultimately we achieve zero indigenous cases. So by 2030, malaria to be eliminated throughout the entire country and re-establishment of transmission prevented. In context of malaria, these two terminologies you should know, that is DDC or drug distribution centers and FTD, that is fever treatment depots. The role of DDC is to provide the anti-malarial tablets, okay, under National Malaria Elimination Program schedule. And fever treatment depots or FTDs, they, along with provision of malarial tablets, anti-malarial tablets, they also collect blood slides to diagnose the malarial cases. So FTD, they diagnose the case and also supplies the medicine, and DDC, they only provide the medicine. Now coming to the treatment of malarial case. So whenever you come across a malarial case, how we shall treat the patient. So it can either be a vivax malaria caused by Plasmodium vivax, or can be caused by Plasmodium falciparum. In case of falciparum, it can be uncomplicated malaria, uncomplicated malaria in pregnancy, because in pregnancy the drug of choices may be different. It can be mixed infection where the person is infected with both vivax and falciparum, and severe malaria. So if you remember those signs and symptoms, which if present will be considered as severe malaria. Okay, coming to the vivax malaria first. This is very easy and also very much straightforward. So on day 1, day 2 and day 3 we are giving a certain drug which is written here as CQ, right? CQ here and CQ here on 3 days. This is chloroquine. We give chloroquine on day 1, day 2 and day 3. The dose is 10 mg per kg on day 1, 10 mg per kg on day 2 and 5 mg per kg on day 3. Now as you can see, the age-wise distribution of drug in terms of dosage is mentioned in the table. It is ideal if you can remember this table according to the age-wise distribution. But if you can't remember, then also it is fine. Just mention that it is 10 mg per kg on day 1 and day 2, and on day 3 it is 5 mg per kg. That is chloroquine. Along with chloroquine, there is another drug which is given, and that is primaquine. Primaquine is given for 14 days. Day 1, day 2, day 3 and then day 4 to day 14. Alright, the dose is 2.5 mg per kg body weight. So, you have to remember primaquine is contraindicated in pregnancy, infants and in G6PD deficiency. Alright. Now here I must mention what is the reason for giving primaquine on 14 consecutive days in case of Vivax malaria. You shall also see very soon that in falciparum malaria also we give primaquine, but the purpose of giving primaquine in Vivax and falciparum are completely different. So if we go back to that life cycle slide here, I hope you remember I said that recrudescence occurs in case of falciparum malaria, whereas relapse occurs in case of Vivax malaria and sometimes during oval and malaria infection. So since we are talking about Vivax and falciparum only, so relapse of malaria occurs with Vivax. That occurs when the hepatic cytosines remains intact instead of rupturing all at the same time. So most of the hepatic cytosines will rupture, but some of them will remain intact and they will rupture after many years, causing the relapse of malaria. The role of primaquine, which is given on 14 consecutive days in case of Vivax malaria, is to kill the parasite which survives in the hepatic cells or hepatocytes. If the in Vivax malaria we give 14 days continuously the primaquine, then it is expected the drug will destroy all the parasites living inside the hepatocytes. So if there is no parasite in the hepatocytes, so further stages cannot occur or cannot develop. So these cycles will not happen. So there is no question of persistence of hepatic cytosine. So relapse can be avoided. So that is the purpose of giving 14 days of primaquine in case of Vivax malaria. Now coming to the falciparum. Now we shall discuss the uncomplicated falciparum cases first. In falciparum malaria, we give 3 days of medication. If you remember, in Vivax malaria, we give chloroquine on 3 days, but primaquine is given for 14 days. Here, the total treatment is completed in 3 days. Now let me tell you something. In earlier days, long back, we used to give chloroquine in falciparum cases also, but with time, the parasites developed resistance to chloroquine. So that is why we had to shift to another therapy or regimen. Now there are two kind of regimens present in our country, and both the regimens are ACT regimen or artemisinin combination therapy regimen. The first one is known as the ACT AL regimen or artemisinin combination therapy artemether lumefantrine regimen, which is given in northeastern states. The second one is known as ACT SP regimen, that is sulfadoxine pyrimethamine regimen, and this is given in rest of the states, that means those states other than the northeastern states. Now West Bengal receives the second, that is ACT SP regimen. So we shall discuss the ACT SP regimen in details. So as you can see, on first day, second and third day, on all 3 days, AS is being given. AS is artesunate, which is given orally in tablet form. Alright. So here artesunate, the dose is 4 mg per kg body weight. On day 2, we give sulfadoxine pyrimethamine. So if you remember, I said the regimen is called ACT-SP regimen. So the SP stands for sulfadoxine pyrimethamine regimen. Now here the dose of sulfadoxine is 25 mg per kg body weight and the pyrimethamine is 1.25 mg per kg body weight. So SP or sulfadoxine pyrimethamine is given on day 1 only. On day 2, we are giving primaquine. So here the primaquine is given on second day, that is only 1 day, unlike Vivax malaria where we give primaquine for 14 consecutive days. Right? So the primaquine dose here is 7.5 mg per kg body weight, which is 3 times the dose that is given in Vivax. And on third day, there is no second drug, only artesunate is given. So artesunate orally on day 1, day 2 and day 3. On day 1, the additional drug is sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, and on day 2, the additional drug is primaquine. There is no additional drug on day 3. So this is the regimen. Again, we have the age-wise distribution here. But if you watch carefully, in both cases, when the age of the patient is less than 1 year, that means it is an infant, primaquine is not given because it is contraindicated. Also, in pregnancy, primaquine is not given. So you have to remember, in pregnancy, in infants, and also in patients with G6PD deficiency, primaquine is not given. Now if you remember, I already said the reason of giving primaquine in Vivax infection is to clear off the hepatic parasites. But in case of falciparum, the purpose of giving the primaquine is completely different. So this is where the primaquine acts in case of Vivax infection. But in falciparum, the single dose of primaquine at higher dose, that is 7.5 mg per kg body weight, it acts on the gametocytes. So to kill the gametocytes, it is given only once, that is on day 2. So remember what are the different reasons for giving primaquine in Vivax infection and as well as in falciparum infection. Alright. Now what if the falciparum infection occurs during pregnancy? If the infection occurs during first trimester, then the drug of choice is quinine salt, which is given orally 3 times a day for 7 consecutive days. You have to remember that quinine can cause hypoglycemia. So that is why the patient must not take the medicine empty stomach and should be taking the medicine after taking foods. If there is severe malaria in pregnancy, although we shall discuss severe malaria next, but what if the severe malaria occurs in pregnancy? If it is first trimester, then parenteral quinine, that means injectable formulation, is to be given. If quinine is not available, then artemisinin derivatives can be given. So some artemisinin drugs in injectable form can also be given in first trimester. If the falciparum infection occurs in second and third trimester and this is uncomplicated malaria, we have to give ACT-SP regimen. So basically this regimen if the pregnancy is in second or third trimester. But what is the thing that I already mentioned, that primaquine is not given in pregnancy. So primaquine is contraindicated. So the patient will receive ACT-SP regimen. He will receive artesunate on day 1, day 2, day 3. Sulfadoxine pyrimethamine on day 1, but on day 2 she will not be given any primaquine. So you have to remember this, but the dose are same. What if there is severe malaria in second or third trimester? Then parenteral artemisinin derivatives like artesunate or RT3, anything can be given injectable preparation. What about mixed infection, that is Vivax and falciparum together? Then we have to give the ACT-SP regimen like this, like artesunate on day 1, day 2, day 3 and sulfadoxine pyrimethamine on day 1. But here the primaquine is not given on day 2. Rather, Primaquine is given how it was given in Vivax. That means from day 1 to day 14 at the dose of 2.5 mg per kg body weight. So mixed infection should be treated with a full course of ACT like falciparum malaria and primaquine daily for 14 days. So the primaquine part is taken from the Vivax malaria infection and the rest of the regimen is taken from the falciparum infection. So you have to remember this. Now coming to certain caution regarding primaquine therapy. Primaquine is contraindicated in infants, in pregnants, and also in those who have G6PD deficiency. So we can identify who is an infant or who is a pregnant woman, but G6PD deficiency identification can be difficult because we do not go for G6PD testing regularly before starting the anti-malarial drug. Now if a person has G6PD deficiency and he is given primaquine, there will be hemolysis. So once we start the anti-malarial treatment, it can be either for Vivax or can be for falciparum. That means the patient is taking primaquine for 14 consecutive days or maybe on day 2 in case of falciparum. If the patient comes with the following signs and symptoms like dark colored urine, yellow conjunctiva, bluish discoloration of lips, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, breathlessness, these indicate that there is hemolysis. So probably the person already has G6PD deficiency. So in that case, the primaquine therapy must be stopped. Next, coming to the severe malaria cases. Majority of the severe malarial cases are due to the falciparum, but sometimes it can also occur from Vivax, very rarely, but most of the time they are from falciparum. So there are certain regimens which is available for severe malarial cases. The most commonly used regimen is the artesunate. If you remember here, we also give artesunate orally on day 1, day 2 and day 3 in falciparum. Here we give artesunate in injectable formulation. The dose is 2.4 mg per kg body weight, either given as intravenous or intramuscularly on the day of admission. So on first day, the patient should receive 3 doses at the time of admission, then after 12 hours and then after 24 hours. So on first 24 hours, he will receive 3 injections, right? Alternatively, if artesunate is not available, the patient can be given artemether or arteether injections. The doses are given here. Okay. Sometimes none of the artemisinin based drugs are available. We can also give quinine in that case. Now quinine, the dose is 20 mg per kg body weight and it is not given as injectable preparation like that. It is given as IV infusion in dextrose. And after giving the loading dose, the maintenance dose is 10 mg per kg body weight 8 hourly. Alright. So these are the options for day 1. The preferable option is artesunate. If it is not available, then artemether or arteether. If none of them are available, we have to give quinine. Now, after giving the drugs on day 1, if from day 2 the condition of the patient improves, that means the patient can take drug orally, we have to shift to the oral drugs. Now remember, sometimes even after having severe malaria, the patient may be able to take drugs orally on day 1 also. But even in that case, we have to give all the drugs in injectable formulation or parenterally. Now on day 2, we shift to the oral preparations. So from day 2, we give artesunate combination therapy, ACT, SP, just like we gave in Plasmodium falciparum cases in uncomplicated malaria. So ACT, SP for 3 days and primaquine single dose as mentioned above here. This is the primaquine single dose on day 2. If on day 1 quinine was given, in that case we have to stick to the quinine on day 2 also. Here the quinine was given parenterally and on day 2 we are shifting to oral medications. So 10 mg per kg orally 3 times a day for 7 consecutive days. Along with that, we give doxycycline once a day, or when the person is pregnant or lactating and children less than 8 years of age, the doxycycline is not indicated. In that case, we give clindamycin. So total 7 days these drugs are to be given. So let me just recap this thing. Severe malarial case, first day always parenteral route drugs. It can be injectable, preferable is artesunate injection, alternatively artemether or arteether. If none of them are available, quinine drug, injectable, but not actually injectable, rather as infusion, IV infusion. On day 2, if the person or the patient can take the drugs orally, we give ACT-SP regimen, just like the uncomplicated falciparum cases. If the patient received quinine therapy on day 1, we shall not give him ACT-SP regimen. On day 2 onwards, we shall give him quinine orally along with doxycycline on clindamycin, because doxycycline is contraindicated in pregnant, in lactating women and children less than 8 years. And this oral regimen have to be completed in next 7 days. So total 7 days of treatment. So this is the treatment for severe malarial cases. Now we have to be very cautious, and it is actually better to avoid these drugs unless absolutely necessary in severe malaria. We should not give adrenaline because it increases the chance of acidosis, lactic acidosis. Corticosteroids are better avoided because it increases the chance of GI bleeding. Intravenous mannitol should be avoided because in case of coma in severe malaria, it increases the duration of coma, and also there are a lot of mortality. Heparin should be avoided because it increases the chance of intracranial hemorrhage, and also we must not overhydrate the patient. So if you remember, in severe malaria there is already renal impairment, right, as indicated by high creatinine and blood urea. So if the kidneys are not functioning well and we are overhydrating the patient, the kidney will not be able to produce adequate amount of urine. So there will be high amount of fluid in our circulation, and the heart has to work very intensely to circulate all these fluids throughout our body, and this can actually lead to heart failure. So that is why overhydration of the patient should be avoided in severe malaria. Coming to chemoprophylaxis, which is given to people who are traveling to high malaria endemic areas. So certain drugs can be started before they reach the high risk areas, and they have to be continued. So what are the recommendations? The dosing schedule for the children should be based on body weight, of course, because we do not give children the adult doses, which will be quite high for their body weight. Certain antimalarials which are to be taken on daily basis, like doxycycline, should be started one day before arrival in the risk area. So if a person is planning to visit a high risk area tomorrow, then he should start taking doxycycline from today. Some weekly medications like chloroquine and mefloquine, which are to be taken once a week. In case of chloroquine, the person should start taking chloroquine 1 week before arrival, and mefloquine 2 to 3 weeks before arrival in the high risk area. Now, as long as the person is in the malarial high risk area, he should continue taking the medication with regularity, and should also continue the drug for 4 weeks after the last possible exposure to infection. So that means if he leaves the high risk area today and goes back to his own place, he should continue the drugs for 4 more weeks, because the parasite may still emerge from the liver during the period. So here, we have to go along back. So hepatic cytons or infected liver cells, to kill these parasites, the person has to continue the drugs. Maybe when the person left, this is the stage he had in his body, the stage of parasite. If he stops taking the drug, these parasites will form the hepatic cytons and it will rupture, causing the malaria infusion. But if he continues the drug for 4 weeks, all these drugs can kill the hepatic parasites, and these further stages will not occur. So that is why it is important to continue the drugs for 4 weeks after leaving the area. Now, monotherapy of oral artemisinin derivatives is banned. Like, we cannot give only artesunate orally. We have to supplement with sulfadoxine pyrimethamine and also primaquinone second day, like this. And in northeastern states, as I mentioned, there is ACT-AL or artemether-lumefantrine regimen. So if you are from northeastern state, you will have to follow this regimen. Adult dose is 4 tablets twice daily for 3 days, 80 mg of artemether and 480 mg of lumefantrine. This is given for 3 consecutive days. Integrated vector management. So far, we discussed how we are going to treat a malarial case. So apart from that, it is also very important to address the vector issues, because if there are a lot of mosquitoes around our houses, around our neighborhood, so with high density there is also high probability of malaria. So that is why we have to control the malaria situation as well. Now as you can see, this is known as integrated vector management or IVM. A very commonly asked explain why question is why this is an integrated approach, because it integrates multiple approaches to control the vector situation. The number one being the chemical approach, that is spraying of different insecticides. Along with that, we are also integrating other approaches like bioenvironmental modification. So if we can avoid stagnation of water around our houses, that will decrease the potential breeding places for mosquito, and of course there will be less density of mosquito and less chance of malaria. And also another approach is personal protection measure. So if we use bed net during sleeping, or maybe wear full sleep clothes whenever possible, that will decrease mosquito bite, and because of that the malarial cases will decrease. Also sometimes we can apply mesh or nets in the windows or screens, and that will actually inhibit the mosquitoes to enter inside our house. So all these approaches are integrated and altogether known as integrated vector management. So what are the approaches here? Measure to control adult mosquitoes by indoor residual sprays. So inside our house, certain insecticides can be sprayed, and the action of this chemical lasts for a long time. So that is why this is known as residual spray, and this is indoor. So indoor residual sprays. Alternatively, outside fogging can also be done, but fogging is not very common. So indoor residual spray is more common in case of malaria. Anti-larval measures like chemical, for example Paris green, mineral oil, everything can be applied in the water body, and from its chemical nature it will kill the larva. Biological approach like Gambusia fish. If Gambusia fishes are released in stagnant water or in water bodies, these fishes feed on the larva of mosquito. And environmental modification, as I already mentioned, we have to avoid stagnation of water. Personal protection, as in use of bed nets, including insecticide treated nets. Okay. DDT is the insecticide of choice, right? But there are reports of DDT resistance, so that is why we give alternatives like synthetic pyrethroids and malathion. Now if we apply DDT or synthetic pyrethroid as insecticide, then 2 rounds of spraying are done every year. But if we have to apply malathion, then 3 rounds of spraying are required. So remember, DDT is the choice, insecticide of choice, but alternatively we have to apply pyrethroid or malathion sometimes. In case of DDT and pyrethroid, we need 2 rounds of spraying every year, but in case of malathion we need 3 rounds of spraying. Now we shall talk about bed nets or mosquito nets. There are 2 types of mosquito nets. One is LLIN, which is known as long lasting insecticidal nets, and there is another one known as ITN or insecticide treated nets. What is the difference between these two? LLIN or long lasting insecticidal nets are prepared in such a way that the fiber of the mosquito nets will contain chemicals in it. So these LLINs are produced in a specialized manner in the factory with application of insecticides in the fiber. So the purpose of producing LLIN is only to prevent malaria, or rather to kill the mosquitoes. So this is a specialized type of mosquito nets. On the other hand, ITN or insecticide treated nets are basically the conventional mosquito nets that we use, and we can spray insecticide on it. That means chemical treatment done on these mosquito nets and they become insecticide treated nets. So that is the difference. So these are the specialized mosquito net and these are the usual or regular mosquito nets. In areas where the API is very high, more than 5, in those areas LLINs are preferred. But if the API is more than 2 but less than 5, in those areas ITN can be used. Alright, now you have to remember, since these insecticides in LLINs are applied during the time of production and the fibers in the mosquito net already contains the insecticide, these last for a very long time. So that is why they are known as long lasting insecticidal nets. So maybe after washing the mosquito nets for 10 times or 12 times, even then the chemical action can persist. Alright, but in case of insecticidal nets or ITNs, which are basically the conventional bed nets, the chemicals does not work for very long time. Maybe after washing the nets for 2 or 3 times, the action of chemicals are completely gone. So that is why LLIN is superior to ITNs. But again, in those areas where the climate is very hot, especially during the summer, or maybe the people do not prefer to use mosquito nets, in those areas we have to rely on the indoor residual spray. So chemical spraying inside the houses is the option here. Coming to the last part of today's discussion, that is malaria vaccine. As on August 2021, we do not have any functional vaccine in India or in any part of the world, but there are a lot of vaccines, different kind of vaccine with different mechanism of action which are still under trial. One of the most promising options are RTS,S/AS01, which is targeted against falciparum malaria. The trial was conducted by WHO in sub-Saharan Africa, and the name of the nations are mentioned here, you can read it. All the children received 3 intramuscular doses of the vaccine at 1 month interval. Whether the 4th dose is needed or not, it is still being evaluated. So the results are still pending. Maybe they already have the result by now, but it is still not marketed, but it is considered to be one of the optimistic options. So hopefully in future we shall have a functional vaccine against malaria, and that will decrease the burden of the disease globally, and we shall step forward towards the elimination of malaria. So with this we conclude today's discussion on malaria. We have learned the epidemiology in terms of agent, host and environmental factors regarding malaria, the clinical features and the treatment of malarial cases, and also the integrated vector management. So thank you very much. Please subscribe to our channel, like the video and share this video with your friends, with your batchmates and also with your friends from other colleges. We also have our Facebook page. The link is given in the description. You can follow it. Take care and we shall see you in our next video.